My mother said I'd never be like my perfect sister. She was right for the wrong reasons. My mother worshipped the ground my older sister Hannah walked on. Hannah wore cardigans and long skirts, spent Friday nights at the library, and never wore makeup. I wore crop tops and mini skirts, went to parties, and actually knew how to do winged eyeliner. To my mother, this meant Hannah was going to be a doctor while I'd be lucky to graduate high school. Every single day, Mom would compare us. When I'd come downstairs for breakfast, she'd look at my outfit and say Hannah would never dress like that because she had self-respect. When I'd go out with friends, she'd mention how Hannah was probably studying for her future, while I was throwing mine away. When I'd be on my phone, she'd remind me that Hannah barely used social media because she was focused on real accomplishments. The truth was I had a 4.0 GPA and was ranked 3rd in my class. I just never told Mom about my grades because she never asked, she just assumed they were bad based on my clothes. I'd been accepted into the National Honor Society, was president of the debate team, and had already gotten early acceptance to 3 Ivy League schools. But Mom never came to my award ceremonies because she assumed I wasn't getting any awards. She was always too busy driving Hannah to her study groups that were actually her boyfriend Ryan's house. Mom thought Hannah was at academic decathlon practice 5 nights a week. She was really at Ryan's apartment where his parents never checked on them. Mom would brag to her friends about Hannah's dedication while Hannah was dedicating herself to something very different. When relatives visited, Mom would parade Hannah around as the family's future success story and literally tell them not to have high expectations for me. She'd say things like, "At least I was pretty, so maybe I'd marry well." My aunt once asked about my grades and Mom laughed saying we don't talk about that, implying they were terrible. Hannah would try to defend me, but Mom would pat her head and say she was sweet for protecting her little sister. Hannah knew about my real grades because she'd seen my report cards when I left them on the kitchen counter hoping Mom would notice. She'd tell me she was proud of me since Mom wouldn't. Hannah was actually a C student who was barely passing her classes, but Mom never asked to see her grades, just assumed they were perfect because Hannah looked studious. The disaster started at Thanksgiving dinner with the whole extended family. Mom was giving her annual speech about Hannah's bright future and how she hoped I'd at least finish high school without getting pregnant. She actually said those exact words in front of 30 relatives. She went on about how Hannah's dedication to studying would pay off while my focus on boys and clothes would be my downfall. That's when Hannah threw up all over the turkey. Mom rushed her to the bathroom thinking she had food poisoning. But when the vomiting continued the next morning and the next, Mom finally took Hannah to the doctor. Hannah was 3 months pregnant. Mom went completely silent when the doctor confirmed it. She kept saying there must be some mistake because Hannah didn't even have a boyfriend. She was always at study group. Hannah had to explain that Ryan existed, and those study groups were never real. Mom tried to keep it secret, but Hannah started showing and had to tell the family. The same relatives who'd heard Mom's Thanksgiving speech about Hannah's perfect future and my inevitable teen pregnancy were now hearing about Hannah dropping out of college to have a baby. Meanwhile, my early acceptance letters started arriving. Mom hadn't been checking the mail for my stuff because she assumed it would all be rejection letters. When Harvard's acceptance package showed up, the mailman mentioned it to our neighbor who mentioned it to Mom. She opened it thinking it was a mistake, and saw not only was I accepted, but I'd gotten a full academic scholarship. She went through my room and found acceptance letters from Yale, Princeton, and Stanford that I'd hidden because I was tired of her not caring. She also found my transcripts showing straight A's for all 4 years, my SAT scores in the 99th percentile, and recommendation letters from teachers calling me the best student they'd ever taught. She confronted me screaming about why I'd hidden this from her. I told her she never asked and assumed I was failing because I wore short skirts. She tried to flip it, saying I should have told her, but I pulled out 3 years of report cards I'd left for her that she'd never looked at. I showed her emails I'd sent about award ceremonies she'd never opened. I had photos from academic competitions she'd missed because she was driving Hannah to fake study groups. Mom tried to save face by suddenly becoming proud of me. She reached for me with both arms like she wanted a hug and started telling everyone in the room about my Harvard acceptance. I stepped back before she could touch me. I told her she didn't get to be proud now. Not after years of telling these same relatives I'd be lucky to graduate high school. The room went dead silent. 30 family members stared at us while Hannah stood there holding her pregnant belly, and Mom's arms hung in the air between us. Nobody moved or spoke or even seemed to breathe. Mom's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I could see her trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make herself look better, but there was nowhere to go. Everyone had heard what she said at Thanksgiving dinner just an hour ago. Everyone knew what she'd been saying about me for years. Lila stood up from her chair at the dining table. She reminded everyone that Mom literally said at Thanksgiving dinner that she hoped I wouldn't get pregnant before finishing high school. Her voice was calm but hard. She pointed out that Hannah was already 3 months along when Mom said those words. Several relatives shifted in their seats and looked down at their plates. I watched them remember Mom's exact speech from earlier, how she'd gone on about Hannah's bright future and my inevitable downfall. Uncle James cleared his throat and stared at his hands. Cousin Rachel looked at Mom with this expression I'd never seen before, like she was seeing a stranger. Mom's face went red and then white. Mom started crying and saying she'd always loved both of us equally. Her voice got high and shaky. She said she never meant to make me feel bad. She was just worried about my future. I pulled out my phone without saying anything. I opened my email and showed Lila the messages I'd sent Mom about award ceremonies over the past 3 years. I turned the screen so she could see the read receipts. Every single email had been opened. Mom had read about the debate team finals. She'd read about the National Honor Society induction. She'd read about the academic decathlon where I placed first in my region. She'd opened every message and never responded, never showed up, never acknowledged any of it. Lila took my phone and scrolled through the emails. Her face changed as she read. She looked at Mom with this expression of complete disappointment that made Mom cry harder. Lila handed my phone back without a word. Hannah suddenly stood up. She told Mom to stop making this about her hurt feelings. Her voice came out louder than I'd ever heard it. She said Mom had spent years making me feel worthless, and now she wanted sympathy for getting caught. Everyone stared at Hannah because she'd never contradicted Mom before, never raised her voice, never said anything that wasn't sweet and agreeable. Mom looked like Hannah had slapped her across the face. She reached for Hannah, but Hannah moved away. Ryan put his hand on Hannah's back and she leaned into him. Mom's hands dropped to her sides. She looked around the room at all the relatives watching her and started crying harder. Nobody moved to comfort her. Nobody said it was okay or that she'd meant well. They all just sat there looking at her while she cried. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I went upstairs to my bedroom and shut the door. I could hear everyone talking downstairs, voices getting louder and overlapping. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall. My hands were shaking. I'd been holding all of this in for so long that now it felt weird to have said it out loud in front of everyone. 20 minutes passed before I heard footsteps on the stairs. Hannah knocked once and came in. She sat on my bed next to me and didn't say anything for a minute. Then she apologized for never standing up for me more forcefully. She said she felt guilty every time Mom praised her while putting me down. She'd known it was wrong, but she didn't know how to stop it without making everything worse. I told her it wasn't her job to fix Mom. She said she still should have tried harder. Hannah admitted she knew I was smarter than her since freshman year. She'd seen my first report card on the counter, the one I'd left there hoping Mom would notice. She saw my straight A's and her own C's, and she understood right then that Mom's whole story about us was backwards. She tried to tell Mom several times that I was doing really well in the school. She'd bring it up at dinner or in the car, just mention that I seemed to be getting good grades or that my teachers said nice things about me. But Mom would just pat her head and change the subject. Mom would say Hannah was sweet for defending her little sister, but I needed to focus on realistic goals. Hannah said it made her feel sick every time it happened. She stopped trying after a while because it was clear Mom didn't want to hear it. We talked for 2 hours about everything. Hannah told me she was actually relieved the pregnancy came out because she was exhausted from lying. She'd been sneaking around for over a year, making up fake study groups and academic practices that didn't exist. Every time Mom bragged to her friends about Hannah's dedication, Hannah felt like she was going to throw up from the guilt. She loved Ryan and she wanted the baby, but she was scared about being a mom at 19. She was also tired of being the fake, perfect daughter Mom had invented. She said Mom's version of her felt like wearing a costume that didn't fit. She couldn't breathe in it anymore. I told her I understood because I'd been hiding who I really was too, just in a different way. We both ended up crying and then laughing at how messed up our family was. Hannah asked which school I was choosing. I said I was leaning toward Harvard. She got excited and grabbed my phone off the bed. She started looking up Boston, scrolling through pictures of the city and the campus. She said Ryan had family in Massachusetts. They'd been talking about moving somewhere fresh to start over, somewhere they could be themselves without everyone's expectations hanging over them. She looked at me with this hopeful expression and said, maybe we could see each other more if they moved to Boston. I could babysit between classes. She laughed, but I could tell she meant it. The idea of having Hannah nearby, of being part of my niece or nephew's life, made something loosen in my chest. The next morning, Mom tried to make my favorite breakfast like nothing had happened. I came downstairs and found her at the stove making blueberry pancakes with the special syrup she only bought for me. She smiled when I walked in and asked if I wanted orange juice or milk. I stood in the doorway watching her perform this mom routine. I told her I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine. She needed to actually acknowledge what she did instead of just performing mom duties. Her smile disappeared. She turned off the stove and the pancakes sat there getting cold. She asked what I meant. I said making breakfast wasn't the same as apologizing or understanding why what she'd done was wrong. Mom sat down at the kitchen table. She asked what I wanted her to say. Her voice had this edge to it that made me angry all over again. I told her that was the whole problem. She still didn't get it. I didn't want her to say anything I had to script for her. I didn't want a fake apology she thought would make me feel better. I wanted her to actually understand why what she did was wrong. I wanted her to realize she'd spent years judging me based on my clothes and making assumptions about my whole future without ever asking me a single real question. She sat there looking at me like I was speaking another language. She opened her mouth and closed it again. I waited, but she didn't say anything. I grabbed a granola bar from the cabinet and went back upstairs. I stayed in my room for the rest of the day, scrolling through my phone and trying not to think about the cold pancakes downstairs. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Hannah knocked twice before opening my door. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing one of Ryan's old sweatshirts that hung loose on her frame. She sat on the edge of my bed without asking and took a deep breath. She told me she was moving in with Ryan next month. Mom was going to lose it, but she didn't care anymore. She was done being the perfect daughter Mom had invented in her head. I asked if she was sure about moving in with Ryan, and she nodded. She said Ryan's parents were helping them find a 2-bedroom apartment near his job. They weren't thrilled about the pregnancy, but they were being supportive instead of pretending everything was fine while secretly judging her. We heard Mom's footsteps on the stairs. Hannah stood up and opened my door wider just as Mom reached the top step. Mom asked if we wanted to order dinner, trying to sound normal. Hannah told her right there in the hallway that she was moving out next month. Mom's face went pale. She started to say Hannah couldn't just move in with some boy. But Hannah cut her off. She said she was an adult making her own choices, not Mom's perfect doll to show off anymore. Mom opened her mouth and closed it again. Hannah walked past her and went downstairs. I heard the front door close a minute later. Over the next week, my phone kept buzzing with calls from relatives. Most of them I'd barely talked to at family gatherings because Mom always steered conversations away from me. Moira called on Tuesday while I was doing homework. She congratulated me on Harvard and told me she'd always thought I was brilliant. She said she was sorry she didn't speak up more when Mom was putting me down at family events. She'd tried to say something a few times, but Mom would change the subject or make a joke that made it awkward to keep pushing. I told her I didn't blame her for Mom's choices. She said she was going to do better about speaking up in the future, because watching what happened at Thanksgiving made her realize how damaging silence could be. 3 more relatives called that week with similar messages. They'd all assumed I was doing fine despite Mom's comments, or they'd thought Mom was just being overdramatic. None of them realized how constant it was, or how much it affected me. My cousin asked if I was okay, and actually waited for a real answer instead of just moving on to the next topic. Monday morning, I had an appointment with my guidance counselor to finalize my college decision paperwork. Mrs. Bradley's office smelled like coffee and had motivational posters covering every wall. She pulled up my file on her computer and smiled when she saw my acceptances listed. She told me she'd been hoping I'd pick Harvard because their pre-law program was perfect for someone with my debate skills. She'd written one of my recommendation letters and had specifically mentioned my ability to construct arguments under pressure. We went through the financial aid packages and compared the different programs. She asked gently if everything was okay at home since I seemed distracted. I started to say everything was fine, but she gave me this look that made it clear she wasn't buying it. She said she'd heard about the Thanksgiving situation through the parent network, and she wanted me to know her door was always open if I needed to talk. I ended up telling her everything. The years of comparisons, the ignored achievements, the whole disaster with Hannah's pregnancy, and my acceptance letters arriving at the same time. Mrs. Bradley listened without interrupting or trying to fix anything. When I finished, she pulled a pamphlet from her desk drawer about family counseling services. She said sometimes the hardest part of success was navigating family dynamics that weren't built to support it. She'd seen it before with high-achieving students whose families didn't know how to handle their success. She wrote down 3 therapist names on a sticky note and told me these were people who specialized in family communication issues. I took the note and stuffed it in my backpack, not sure if I'd ever use it. 2 days later, Mom knocked on my door after dinner. She asked if I would come to family therapy with her and Hannah. She'd already made an appointment for Saturday morning with one of the therapists Mrs. Bradley had recommended. I asked how she got that name, and she admitted she'd called the school to ask for resources. I was skeptical about the whole thing. Mom had a history of performing concern when other people were watching, then going back to her old patterns when no one was paying attention. But Hannah texted me later that night saying Mom had asked her to come too, and maybe we should give it one shot to see if she was actually serious about changing. I agreed to 1 session. Just 1, to see what happened. Saturday morning felt weird. We drove to the therapist's office in complete silence. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines nobody ever reads. A woman in her 50s called us back after 10 minutes. She introduced herself as Dr. Chang and led us to an office with a couch and 2 chairs. Mom immediately tried to take control of the room, explaining why we were there and framing it like she just wanted to improve communication. Doctor? Chang let her talk for about 3 minutes, then held up her hand. She said she'd prefer to hear from each of us individually about why we were there. Hannah went first and talked about feeling pressured to be perfect. I went next and explained the years of being dismissed and judged. Mom tried to interrupt twice, but Dr. Chang redirected her each time. When Mom finally got to speak, she tried to say she was just worried about my future and wanted the best for both of us. Dr. Chang asked why she never checked my grades if she was so concerned about my academic future. Mom didn't have an answer for that. The session got harder from there. Dr. Chang didn't let Mom deflect or make excuses. Every time Mom tried to justify her behavior or explain it away, Dr. Chang asked a specific question that made the justification fall apart. When Mom said she was trying to protect me, Dr. Chang asked what she was protecting me from. Mom said she was worried I'd make the same mistakes as her sister who partied through high school and barely graduated. Dr. Chang pointed out that she'd never actually asked about my life or checked my grades, so how would she know if I was making mistakes or succeeding? Mom's face crumpled. She admitted she'd just assumed I was like her sister because we dressed similarly and went to parties. Dr. Chang asked if she could hear how unfair that assumption was. Mom nodded, tears running down her face. Hannah told Dr. Chang about the years of being put on a pedestal she never wanted. Every time Mom praised her for studying or called her dedicated, Hannah felt like she was suffocating under the weight of expectations she couldn't meet. She started lying about study groups because she needed to breathe, needed to be a normal teenager instead of the perfect daughter Mom had invented. She said Mom's constant praise felt like pressure to be perfect, and she couldn't handle it anymore. Dr. Chang asked Mom if she understood how her treatment of both daughters had damaged them in different ways. Mom whispered yes. I told Dr. Chang I spent 4 years achieving in secret because I learned my accomplishments didn't matter to Mom. Only my appearance mattered. Only how I looked and dressed and whether I fit Mom's idea of what a successful daughter should look like. I stopped trying to get Mom's attention or approval because it hurt too much to keep being ignored. Dr. Chang asked Mom if she could hear how her assumptions had damaged both daughters in different ways. Mom sat there crying, nodding, not saying anything. Dr. Chang said this was a good first session because at least everyone was being honest, She gave us homework assignments about communication and scheduled another appointment for 2 weeks later. After the session, we walked to the car in silence. Mom sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before she could start the engine, just crying with her hands on the steering wheel. Hannah and I sat in the back seat waiting. Finally, Mom turned around and looked at both of us. She said she was sorry. Really sorry. And she knew that wasn't enough, but she wanted to do better. Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't say anything back because I didn't know what to say. Hannah reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom turned back around and started the car, and we drove home without talking. The first few days after that car ride were weird. Mom would come into my room in the morning and ask what I had planned for the day, then just stand there waiting for an answer like she'd never done this before. I'd tell her I had debate practice or homework, and she'd nod and ask follow-up questions that felt rehearsed. She wanted to know what topic we were debating or what subject the homework was for, and I could tell she was trying really hard to sound interested instead of judgmental. It felt forced and uncomfortable, like we were both reading from a script neither of us had memorized. But she kept doing it every single day. She'd ask about my classes, my friends, what I was working on for debate team. She actually listened when I answered instead of interrupting to compare me to Hannah or lecture me about my choices. After 2 weeks of this, the conversation started feeling slightly less awkward. I still didn't trust it completely, but at least she was trying. Hannah and Ryan came over for dinner on a Friday night 3 weeks after the therapy session. Mom set the table with her good dishes and made lasagna, which was Ryan's favorite according to Hannah. I could see Mom's hands shaking a little when she served the food, and her smile looked tight. Ryan thanked her for having him over and complimented the cooking. Mom asked him about his job at the warehouse and whether he and Hannah had found an apartment yet. Her voice stayed calm and polite, even though I knew she was probably dying inside watching her pregnant 19-year-old daughter with the boyfriend she'd just learned existed a month ago. Ryan told her about a 2-bedroom place they'd looked at near his work, and Mom asked practical questions about rent and the neighborhood, instead of criticizing their choices. Hannah kept glancing at me with this surprised expression like she couldn't believe Mom was being civil. After dinner, Mom even asked if they needed any furniture for the new place because she had some extra stuff in the garage. It was small progress, but it was still progress. The financial aid package from Harvard arrived in a thick envelope 2 days later. I opened it at the kitchen table while Mom was making coffee. The scholarship covered tuition and most of room and board, but there was still a gap of about $8,000 per year for books, fees, and other expenses. I was reading through the breakdown when Mom looked over my shoulder and saw the numbers. She immediately said she'd cover whatever I needed, that she had savings specifically set aside for college expenses. I put the papers down and told her I needed time to think about accepting money from her. She looked hurt, but nodded. I took the envelope to my room and spent an hour staring at the numbers, trying to figure out if taking her money meant I was forgiving her, or just being practical. Hannah showed up at my bedroom door that evening without calling first. She sat on my bed and asked if I was okay, and I showed her the financial aid papers. She read through them and then looked at me seriously. She told me I should take Mom's money because she had it, and this was a concrete way for her to actually support my future, instead of just talking about supporting it. Hannah pointed out that Mom had paid for her entire first year of college before she dropped out, which was over $30,000. She said it was only fair that Mom invest in my education too, especially since I'd actually use it. Hannah told me not to let pride get in the way of going to my dream school. She said accepting practical support wasn't the same as pretending everything was fine between us. I sat there thinking about it after she left. Hannah was right that Mom had the money and it made sense practically, but I also didn't want Mom to think she could buy her way out of accountability. I went downstairs the next morning and found Mom in the kitchen. I told her I'd accept her financial help for Harvard, but I needed her to understand that this didn't erase what happened between us. This was practical support for my education, not forgiveness or a fresh start. Mom looked at me for a long moment and then nodded. She said she understood the difference between buying forgiveness and making real amends. She promised the money came with no strings attached and no expectations that I'd suddenly forget years of being ignored and belittled. She'd transfer the funds when I needed them, and that would be that. I felt something relax in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. We weren't okay yet, maybe wouldn't be for a long time, but at least we were being honest with each other. Kayla caught me after debate practice on a Tuesday and asked if I wanted to compete in the state finals next month. Our team had qualified and she needed to know who was committing. I almost said no automatically because everything with my family felt so messy and complicated. But then I stopped and realized I was about to let family drama steal another achievement from me. I'd spent 4 years hiding my accomplishments because Mom didn't care, and now I was going to skip state finals because Mom suddenly did care. That was ridiculous. I told Kayla yes, I was in. She grinned and said she knew I wouldn't bail on the team. We started planning our arguments that afternoon. I threw myself into preparing for state finals over the next 3 weeks. I researched for hours every day, practiced my delivery in front of the mirror, ran through rebuttals with Kayla until we both had them memorized. Mom noticed I was staying up late working and actually asked what I was preparing for. I told her about state finals and she asked if she could come watch. I looked at her carefully and said she could come, but she needed to understand this wasn't about her. This was about me and my team and what we'd worked for. She agreed and said she just wanted to see me do what I was good at. I didn't know if I believed her completely, but I told her when and where the competition would be. State finals happened on a Saturday in April at the convention center downtown. Our team drew the affirmative position on whether social media companies should be regulated as public utilities. I'd prepared arguments about free speech, monopoly power, and the public interest for weeks. The preliminary rounds went well, and we made it to the finals against a team from a private school in the suburbs. I gave the closing argument, laying out exactly why regulations serve the public good without suppressing innovation. My voice stayed steady, and my points landed cleanly. When the judges announced we'd won, Kayla grabbed my arm and screamed. I looked up at the audience and saw Mom in the third row crying. But this time it felt different because she wasn't crying about what she'd missed or what she'd gotten wrong. She was crying because she was finally seeing me as I actually was, instead of who she'd assumed I was. After the award ceremony, Mom came up and hugged me. She told me she was proud of me, and her voice cracked on the words. This time I could tell she actually meant it instead of just performing pride for other people to see. She apologized for missing so many moments like this one over the years. I pulled back and told her she couldn't get those moments back, but she could show up for future ones. She nodded and wiped her eyes. Kayla dragged me away to celebrate with the team, and I looked back to see Mom still standing there watching me with this expression I'd never seen before. It looked like she was finally understanding what she'd lost. Hannah called me that night while I was still riding the high from winning. She sounded breathless and said she'd felt the baby move for the first time. Her voice was shaking with this mix of fear and excitement. She described it as little flutters in her stomach that she'd thought was indigestion at first, but then they kept happening. She asked if I'd help her set up the nursery when she and Ryan moved into their new apartment next month. I said yes immediately. Hannah started crying and thanking me, saying she was scared about being a mom, but it helped knowing I'd be there. I told her she was going to be fine and we'd figure it out together. After we hung up, I sat on my bed thinking about how completely different my life looked now compared to 6 months ago. Everything had fallen apart at Thanksgiving, but somehow we were all building something new from the pieces. The Saturday morning, Hannah and I drove to Worcester. The apartment building looked smaller than I expected, but solid. Ryan met us at the door with paint cans and brushes already spread across drop cloths in what would be the nursery. The room was tiny with one window facing a parking lot, but Hannah kept touching the walls like they were something precious. We spent hours painting it a soft yellow, because Hannah said she wanted something neutral until they knew if the baby was a boy or girl. Ryan worked quietly on the trim while Hannah and I covered the main walls. She kept making jokes about how I could drive up from Harvard on weekends to babysit between studying for exams. I laughed at first, but then something shifted in my chest when I realized I actually wanted that. I wanted to be the aunt who showed up and held this baby and was part of their life instead of someone who sent cards twice a year. Hannah noticed me getting quiet and asked if I was okay. I told her I was just thinking about how different everything was going to be in a few months when she had a whole person depending on her. She put down her paint roller and said she was terrified, but also excited in a way she never felt about anything Mom wanted her to do. Ryan finished the trim and came over to look at our work. He thanked me for being supportive when a lot of Hannah's family had been judgmental and cruel. He said Hannah's cousin stopped talking to her completely, and one of her aunts told her she was throwing her life away. I looked at him carefully because I'd been prepared to hate him for getting my sister pregnant and messing up her college plans. But he seemed genuine when he talked about Hannah and the baby. He told us he was taking community college classes at night while working full-time at a warehouse during the day. He wanted to finish his degree eventually so he could get a better job and support his family properly. Hannah leaned against him, and they looked at each other in this way that made me feel like I was intruding on something private. I realized he actually loved her, and wasn't just some guy who got her pregnant and disappeared. That mattered more than I expected it to. Trinity called me 2 weeks before graduation, and said she was throwing me a going-away party. She'd invited everyone from debate team and most of our friends from the school. Mom found out about it somehow and asked if she could come. I stood in the kitchen looking at her while she waited for my answer. Part of me wanted to say no just to hurt her the way she'd hurt me for years. But another part of me was tired of fighting and just wanted one normal thing before I left for college. I told her she could come, but she needed to just be a regular parent there. No speeches about my achievements she just discovered. No making it about her and how proud she was now. Just show up and be normal. She agreed immediately and said she understood. The party happened on a Friday night at Trinity's house. Her parents had set up tables in the backyard with food and drinks and decorations. My friends were all there laughing and taking pictures and talking about where everyone was going to college. Mom arrived exactly on time and brought a cake she'd made herself. She stayed near the edge of the party just watching me interact with everyone. She didn't try to insert herself into conversations or make announcements. She just stood there with this expression on her face like she was seeing me for the first time. Kayla came up and hugged me and said she was going to miss having me on debate team next year. Trinity made a toast about how I was going to Harvard, and we were all going to stay friends forever no matter where we ended up. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed quiet. After most people had left and we were cleaning up, Mom came over and helped me carry trash bags to the curb. She told me she didn't realize how many people I had in my life who valued me. She said watching me with my friends made her understand how much of my world she'd never seen, because I felt like I had to hide it from her. Her voice cracked when she apologized for making me feel that way. Graduation day arrived hot and bright. I'd spent 2 weeks writing my third-rank speech about the difference between being seen and being looked at. I wrote about how sometimes the people closest to us know us the least, because they're looking at us through their own fears and assumptions, instead of seeing who we actually are. I practiced it so many times the words felt smooth in my mouth. When I walked across the stage in my cap and gown to give the speech, I could see Mom in the audience in the third row. I started talking, and my voice stayed steady, even though my hands were shaking. I talked about how being looked at means someone's eyes pass over you, but they're not really taking you in. Being seen means someone understands who you are beyond what they expect or want you to be. I didn't say Mom's name, but everyone in that audience who knew our family understood exactly what I was talking about. Mom cried through my entire speech with tears running down her face. I could see relatives turning to look at her because they all remembered Thanksgiving and the years before that. When I finished and walked back to my seat, Hannah grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. She leaned over and whispered that I was the bravest person she knew. The week after graduation, I drove to Worcester to help Hannah and Ryan move into their apartment. Most of their stuff fit in Ryan's truck and my car. We carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs in the heat until we were all sweating and exhausted. Ryan ordered pizza, and we sat on their living room floor eating it straight from the box because they hadn't unpacked plates yet. Hannah told me she'd enrolled in online classes to finish her degree while pregnant. She said she was determined to graduate eventually, even if it took longer than planned. She talked about the classes she'd signed up for and how she was going to do the work during her lunch breaks at the part-time job she'd gotten at a bookstore. Ryan supported her completely and said they'd figure out the schedule once the baby came. I told Hannah I was proud of her for taking responsibility for her life instead of just accepting what happened and giving up. She looked at me seriously and said, "Watching me stand up to Mom at Thanksgiving showed her it was possible to define yourself instead of accepting other people's definitions." She said she'd spent so long being the perfect daughter Mom invented that she forgot she could choose who she wanted to be. Getting pregnant was a mistake, but it also freed her from pretending anymore. Now she was figuring out who she actually was instead of who Mom needed her to be. Mom called me 3 days before I was supposed to leave for Harvard. She asked if we could have one more family therapy session. I agreed, and we all showed up at the therapist's office that Thursday afternoon. The therapist had us each talk about what we needed from each other going forward. Hannah went first and talked about needing space to figure out motherhood without constant advice and criticism. Mom struggled with that, but agreed to let Hannah ask for help instead of forcing it on her. The therapist nodded and turned to me. I told Mom I needed her to respect that I was an adult making my own choices. I needed her to trust me instead of always assuming the worst about me based on nothing. I needed her to actually ask about my life instead of deciding she already knew everything about it. Mom listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said she understood. She admitted her assumptions came from her own fears and insecurities and not anything I actually did. She said she saw me wearing short skirts and going to parties and it scared her because she was afraid I'd make the same mistakes she made when she was young. She projected all her regrets onto me instead of seeing I was nothing like her at that age. The therapist asked if she could hear how unfair that was to me, and Mom said yes. She said it clearly and looked right at me when she said it. The therapist wrapped up our session with homework assignments for all of us. Mom had to write down 3 times she made assumptions about me and what the actual truth was. Hannah had to practice setting boundaries by telling Mom no about something small at least once before our next session. I had to think about what a healthy relationship with Mom would look like and write down specific things I needed from her. We scheduled another appointment for the following week and walked out to the parking lot together. Mom asked if we wanted to grab dinner, but Hannah said she needed to get back to Ryan. I told Mom I had plans with friends, which was true, but also I wasn't ready to sit through a meal with her yet. She looked hurt but nodded and said she understood. Hannah hugged me before getting in her car and whispered that she was proud of me for being honest in therapy. I watched Mom drive away and felt this weird mix of hope and exhaustion. The next week's session started with Mom reading her homework. She'd written about assuming I was failing math when I actually had the highest grade in my AP calculus class. She wrote about assuming I was irresponsible with money when I'd been saving everything from my part-time job for college expenses. She wrote about assuming I'd chosen my college major randomly when I'd been researching pre-law programs since sophomore year. Her voice cracked when she read the last one, and the therapist asked her what she was feeling. Mom said she felt ashamed that she'd been so wrong about so many things. Hannah went next and talked about how she'd told Mom no when Mom tried to buy baby clothes without asking what Hannah actually wanted. Mom had gotten upset at first, but then apologized and asked Hannah to show her what she liked instead. The therapist praised Hannah for following through and asked how it felt. Hannah said it was scary, but also good to have Mom actually listen to her opinion. When it was my turn, I pulled out my list of what I needed from Mom. I said I needed her to ask about my life instead of assuming she already knew everything. I needed her to celebrate my achievements instead of acting like they didn't matter. I needed her to trust me to make good decisions and only offer advice when I asked for it. I needed her to see me as my own person, instead of comparing me to Hannah all the time. Mom listened to the whole list without interrupting, and when I finished, she asked if she could respond. The therapist nodded and Mom looked right at me. She said she heard everything I said and she agreed those were fair things to ask for. She said she knew she couldn't fix years of damage overnight, but she wanted to try. She asked if I'd be willing to have dinner with her once a week, so she could practice actually getting to know me. I thought about it for a minute and then said yes, but with a condition. I told her the dinners had to be about me sharing my life, not about her giving advice or comparing me to Hannah. Mom agreed immediately. Hannah spoke up then and said she needed something too. She told Mom she needed space to figure out motherhood without constant advice and criticism. Mom's face did this thing where I could tell she wanted to argue, but she caught herself. She took a breath and said, "Okay." She asked Hannah if it would be all right if she waited for Hannah to ask for help instead of jumping in with suggestions. Hannah looked surprised but nodded and said yes, that would be perfect. The therapist smiled and said this was real progress. She asked Mom if she understood why both of us needed these boundaries. Mom said yes. She realized she'd been trying to control both of us in different ways. With me, she'd tried to control me through criticism, and with Hannah, she'd tried to control her through praise. Either way, she hadn't let either of us just be ourselves. The therapist asked what she thought caused that need for control. Mom was quiet for a long time, and then she said she thought it came from her own mother. Her mom had been super critical, and nothing Mom did was ever good enough. She said she'd promised herself she'd be different with her own kids, but somehow she'd ended up doing the same thing, just in a different way. She started crying and said she was so sorry for putting her own issues on us. Hannah got up and hugged Mom, and after a second I did too. It felt weird but also kind of good to hug her without all the anger between us. The therapist let us have that moment and then said this was exactly the kind of honesty that would help us heal as a family. She said Mom had just identified something really important and she should explore that more. Mom wiped her eyes and said she wanted to. She told us she was going to continue therapy on her own because she realized she had issues with control and projection that damaged her relationships with both of us. She said she wanted to be a better mother and grandmother. Hannah squeezed her hand and I nodded. The therapist said that was an excellent decision, and she could recommend someone who specialized in family of origin issues. Mom wrote down the name and number. We ended the session with the therapist reminding us that healing takes time, and there would be setbacks. She said the important thing was, we were all committed to doing the work. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for Harvard, Mom threw me a proper celebration dinner. She invited the whole extended family and set up tables in our backyard. She'd ordered a cake that said, "Congratulations, Harvard graduate," and hung up decorations in crimson and white. When everyone arrived, she made them go around and say something they admired about me. It was awkward at first, but then Lila talked about how determined I was. Moira mentioned how I'd always been kind to her kids even when I was stressed. Other relatives shared memories of me helping them with things or making them laugh. Mom stood up last with a glass of wine and the whole yard went quiet. She said she wanted to make a toast about how wrong she'd been about me. She said for years she'd assumed I wasn't focused on my future because I dressed differently than Hannah and liked to have fun. She said she'd missed countless achievements and accomplishments because she never bothered to look past her own assumptions. Her voice got shaky when she said I'd achieved everything through my own hard work despite her lack of support. She said she was sorry for all the years she'd made me feel invisible, and she was grateful I was giving her a chance to do better. She raised her glass and said she was proud of me, and she hoped I knew that now. Everyone clinked glasses and drank, and I felt my throat get tight. After dinner, Lila pulled me aside near the back fence. She said she was sorry she didn't intervene more over the years. She told me she'd tried to talk to Mom a few times, but Mom was so convinced she was right that it seemed impossible to get through to her. Lila said she felt guilty for not pushing harder. I told her I didn't blame anyone else for Mom's choices, and I appreciated her trying. Lila hugged me and said she was going to make sure to really see her own kids instead of assuming she knew who they were. She said watching our family go through this had taught her to ask more questions and make fewer assumptions. The drive to Cambridge took 6 hours with Mom crying in the passenger seat every time we passed another mile marker. She kept saying she couldn't believe I was actually leaving for college and how fast time had gone by. Hannah and Ryan followed behind us in their car with baby Lily strapped in her car seat, and Hannah texted me updates every hour about how Lily was doing on her first road trip. When we finally pulled up to my dorm building, there were students everywhere carrying boxes and parents taking photos and campus tour guides directing traffic. I grabbed my first suitcase from the trunk and Mom immediately tried to take it from me saying it looked too heavy. I told her I could handle it and she stepped back looking hurt, but she didn't argue. My room was on the 3rd floor of Matthew's hall, and by the time we carried everything up the stairs, I was sweating through my shirt. The door was already open when we got there and a girl with long black hair was unpacking boxes on the left side of the room. She turned around when she heard us come in and smiled really big. She introduced herself and said she was from San Diego, and she was planning to study political science before law school. I told her my name and that I was thinking about the same path. Within 10 minutes, we were talking about Supreme Court cases and debate strategies while our families unpacked our stuff around us. My roommate's parents seemed nice, and they kept making jokes about how their daughter talked about law school since she was 12. Mom stood in the corner watching me interact with my roommate, and I could see her realizing I had a whole life she knew nothing about. Hannah came in with Lily, and my roommate immediately asked to hold her. She bounced Lily gently while telling us about her little brother back home and how much she missed him already. Ryan helped Mom set up my desk area, and he was really patient with her even when she kept rearranging things. By late afternoon, the room was set up, and both sets of parents were taking photos of us in front of the dorm. Mom pulled me aside near the stairwell and asked if I had everything I needed. I told her I was fine, and she nodded but didn't move. She finally said she was proud of me, and she hoped I knew that now. I told her I knew, and she hugged me tight. Hannah hugged me next and whispered that I better call her all the time. Ryan shook my hand and said he was glad I'd be close enough to visit Lily on weekends. They left around 5, and I watched from my window as Mom got in the car and looked up at my building one more time before driving away. My roommate ordered pizza for dinner, and we ate it sitting on our beds talking about our high schools and what we wanted to do with our law degrees. She told me about growing up in California, and I told her about my family situation. She listened without judging and said her mom had issues too, so she got it. That night, after my roommate fell asleep, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling thinking about how different everything felt. My phone buzzed around 11, and it was Mom texting to make sure I was okay. I texted back that I was fine and settling in. She asked about my roommate and if I liked her. I told her yes, and that we had a lot in common. Mom sent back a heart emoji, which was weird because she never used emojis. She asked if I needed anything and if my classes started tomorrow. I answered her questions, and she kept responding right away. We texted back and forth for 20 minutes about normal stuff like what time I was waking up and if I'd eaten enough dinner. She asked questions and actually listened to my answers instead of lecturing me about what I should be doing. When I finally said goodnight, she told me she loved me and to call her tomorrow. I put my phone down and realized this was the first real conversation we'd had where she wasn't comparing me to Hannah or assuming the worst about my choices. It felt strange but also kind of nice. The next morning, I woke up early and went to the freshman orientation events. My roommate and I walked around campus together looking at all the different buildings and trying to figure out where our classes would be. During lunch, I saw a table for the debate team and I stopped to talk to them. The team captain was a junior who told me they'd heard about my state finals performance from my high school coach. She said tryouts were next week and she hoped I'd come. I signed up right there and she gave me a schedule of practice times. At another table, I found the pre-law society and joined that too. The student running the table said they had guest speakers from law schools and law firms come talk every month. By the end of the week, I'd been to 3 debate team practices and the coach pulled me aside after the third one. She told me my arguments were really strong and she could see why I'd done well at state finals. She said she was excited to see what I could do at the college level where the competition was even harder. I felt this rush of pride because someone was recognizing my abilities based on what I could actually do, instead of what they assumed about me. Trinity started texting me constantly about her experience at Yale. She sent me photos of her campus and her roommate and all the clubs she was joining. We made plans to visit each other once we got settled into our schedules. She texted me one night saying she was proud of how I'd handled everything with my family and still made it here. She said a lot of people would have given up, but I kept pushing forward. Hannah sent me photos of Lily every single day. In the pictures, I could see Lily getting bigger and Hannah looking more confident holding her. Hannah texted me updates about her online classes and said she was managing better than she expected. Ryan was helping with night feeding so she could study, and his parents watched Lily during her class times. She sent me a photo of her first essay grade and it was a B+. She seemed genuinely excited about it. In early October, Mom called and said she wanted to come visit for Parents' Weekend. I told her that was fine and she asked if there was anything specific I wanted to do. I suggested showing her around campus and maybe having dinner with my roommate. Mom agreed without trying to plan everything herself, which was different. When she arrived that Saturday morning, she let me lead her around campus, pointing out my favorite spots. I showed her the library where I studied and the building where my debate team practiced. She met my roommate and asked her questions about California and her family. At dinner, Mom talked to my debate team friends who joined us, and she seemed genuinely interested in what they were saying. She asked them about their majors and their goals without making it about herself. After dinner, we walked around Harvard Yard and Mom told me she'd been reading books about emotional intelligence and parenting. She said she was trying to understand where she went wrong with me and Hannah. She admitted she'd projected her own fears onto both of us instead of seeing who we actually were. She said she couldn't change the past, but she was committed to being better going forward. I told her I appreciated her efforts and I could see she was really trying. I explained that rebuilding trust would take time, but I was willing to work on our relationship if she kept putting in the effort. Mom nodded and said she understood. She promised to keep going to therapy and to keep working on herself. By Thanksgiving, our family dynamic had completely shifted. We all gathered at Hannah and Ryan's apartment instead of at Mom's house. Mom helped with Lily while Hannah and I cooked together in the tiny kitchen. We weren't perfect, and there were still awkward moments, but we were honest with each other now. During dinner, Mom asked Hannah about her classes and actually listened when Hannah explained what she was learning. She asked me about my debate competitions without assuming I was wasting time. After everyone finished eating, Hannah pulled me into the bedroom where Lily was sleeping. She closed the door and told me she wanted to thank me for refusing to accept Mom's treatment. She said it forced all of us to confront the dysfunction we'd been living with for years. Hannah said Lily would grow up in a family that saw people for who they really were, instead of making assumptions based on appearances. I flew back to Cambridge on the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and walked across Harvard Yard with my suitcase rolling behind me. The bare trees looked different from they had a few months ago, like I was seeing them with new eyes instead of the nervous freshman eyes I'd had in August. My roommate was already back in our dorm unpacking her own bags from California. She asked how my break went and I told her it was good. Really good, actually. She said I seemed lighter somehow, less tense in my shoulders. I hadn't realized I'd been carrying that tension until she pointed it out. On Monday, I had debate practice and my coach pulled me aside after we finished our drills. She said something had shifted in me over the break and I was taking up space in the room differently. She asked if I'd finally stopped apologizing for being good at what I did. I laughed because she was right. I'd spent so many years making myself smaller so Mom wouldn't notice my success that I'd forgotten how to just exist without shrinking. My coach said whatever happened over Thanksgiving had done me good, and she wanted to see that confidence in our next competition. Finals week hit hard and fast with papers due and exams stacked on top of each other. I pulled 3 all-nighters in the library surrounded by other stressed students who were also surviving on coffee and granola bars. But I wasn't scared of the pressure like I thought I'd be. All those years of getting perfect grades in secret while pretending I didn't care had taught me how to motivate myself without needing anyone else's approval or recognition. I'd learned to push through exhaustion and stress without anyone cheering me on, which meant now that I was finally in a place that valued my work, the pressure felt manageable instead of crushing. I finished my last exam on a Friday afternoon and walked out of the building feeling like I'd just run a marathon. My roommate and I went to get pizza to celebrate surviving our first semester, and she told me she'd never seen anyone stay that focused during finals. I told her I'd had good practice. Grades came out the next week while I was packing to go home for winter break. I logged into the student portal and saw the 3.9 GPA staring back at me from the screen. My roommate squealed when I told her and gave me a huge hug. The debate coach had also sent me an email saying I'd made the varsity team for next semester, based on my performance in the fall competitions. I sat on my bed staring at my phone, trying to decide if I wanted to call home or just wait until I got there. I finally called, and Mom answered on the second ring. I told her about my grades and the debate team, and she started crying, but in a different way than before. She said she was so proud of me, and she knew I'd worked incredibly hard. She didn't make it about herself or try to take credit for pushing me. She just celebrated what I'd done. Hannah grabbed the phone from Mom and started teasing me about making her look bad again with my perfect grades. But this time she was laughing for real, and I could hear genuine happiness in her voice instead of the fake cheer she used to put on for Mom's benefit. She said Lily was going to have the smartest aunt in the world. I told her I'd be home in 2 days, and I couldn't wait to see the baby. After I hung up, I sat on my bed looking around at my half-packed room. This year had been completely different from what I'd expected when I left for college in August. I'd thought I was escaping my family and all the dysfunction that came with Mom's treatment of me, but instead I'd ended up forcing all of us to be honest with each other for the first time. My family wasn't perfect, and we still had a lot of work to do on rebuilding trust and communication. But we were building something real now based on seeing each other as we actually were, instead of the assumptions and projections we'd been living with for years. I zipped up my suitcase and texted Hannah that I'd be home soon. I was heading into my future knowing I'd earned every single bit of it myself through years of hard work that nobody saw or acknowledged. That knowledge sat solid in my chest like an anchor. Nobody could take it away from me or diminish it or claim credit for it. It was mine and mine alone, and that made it worth more than any praise Mom could have given me back when I was desperate for her to notice.